Hello everybody, my name is John Mark Johnson Jr. I'm the host of Reformed GGA, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys about a gun accessory. I would prefer to be talking to you about a whole brand new gun, but unfortunately, as you guys know who've followed the channel for a while, you know that I recently had some medical issues and there's some medical costs, and I have been able to get back to work, praise God, but my budget isn't quite back to what it used to be, and so the whole new gun thing is going to have to wait a little bit. But in the intervening time, I was able to afford this little guy right here. This is a magnifier, a 3x magnifier to be precise, made by Holosun. And these are not new devices at all. They've been on the market for a very long time, but I'd never really messed around with them before. And my conception of guns is that I usually have a gun with a particular usage in mind, and I take one particular optic that I think is going to fit that usage and put it on the gun. This KS-47 works as an example. I've reviewed this gun in the past. It's made by Palmetto State Armory, and the older versions, before they added the enhanced extractor, had problems with parts breakage, primarily the extractor. That's why they got the enhanced extractors in the new ones. And so yeah, it's not the best in terms of reliability. This one is also extremely overgassed, and so there's issues that come with that as well. So it's not really an ideal, self-defense gun or something like that, but it does illustrate my point for me. This is a pistol that is short barrel, no true stock, it's just a brace, and this gun is basically somewhat optimized for close quarters type shooting. Basically 50 yards and in, or more specifically, like maybe in and around the house as your bedside defense gun or something like that. It's not really optimized for long range. It's optimized to be more maneuverable. And so for that particular intended use, putting a red dot optic on it is what made the most sense at the time. Red dots work very well up close, and even though I have an astigmatism, the red dots still work at the CQB type distances. And this particular red dot is a little bit special. It is a Holosun 503G model, and that model has an ACSS reticle in it that has a little chevron at the top and 3 dots underneath. And with my astigmatism, I'm not always able to distinguish those 3 dots as well as I would like, but it does make a little bit of an arrow pattern that allows me to be a little bit more precise with it than I would with other red dot sights. So for the overall system and for the initial intended purpose kind of as being more of a close quarters type gun than something longer range, it's a decent enough setup. Have a little bit of pick rail out here on the side for a weapon light, so that I can use it at night around the apartment or whatever. The concept is there. Like I said, the reliability of these early versions is not, but the concept makes for a pretty good CQB type gun. Well, as I discovered that it's really not so great for CQB or anything serious in which I might have to defend my life, because like I said, there's issues with parts breakage and stuff like that, I started looking at using it at greater ranges, because a lot of times when I go out to the range to shoot, that's what I wind up spending a decent amount of time on, is trying to hit targets that are a little bit further out there, 100 yards, 200 yards, occasionally 300 yards, but it's usually 200 yards and in. And the red dot on it, while I was able to get out to those distances, it really wasn't optimal. It's better than a lot of other red dots, but not completely there, and especially with my astigmatism, things start to get fuzzy and blurry and whatnot at those greater ranges, and just don't have the kind of precision that I would like. And so, with that being the case, and with me kind of wanting to change the role of the gun from something that's dedicated to close quarters to something that would be easier, not necessarily, not that it was impossible before, but easier to use at kind of intermediate ranges, that's where the prospect of the magnifier came in, and I thought, I don't really have anything to lose by it necessarily. Although I will say it did wind up being a small disappointment in that I thought it would work with all of the guns that I have red dots on, and it turns out that's not the case. The problem with this particular model, at least, different manufacturers will do a little bit different things, but the problem with this model is that it is only made to be adjustable to 2 heights. Different red dots and holographic sights and those kinds of things are usually meant to be set at a different heights above the gun. The 2 most common are what are called absolute co-witness, which means that if you had the standard iron sights on an AR, that the optic would have its point of aim right in line with those sights. It would be a perfect co-witness. You could basically take the iron sights that were sighted in for that gun and sight in the red dot using those iron sights, and it would lay basically right on top of the sights. So that's an absolute co-witness height. Most people don't run that height though. What most people do is they do the lower 1/3 co-witness. And what that means is that if I look through the tube of the red dots or the holographic sights and I get the red dots centered, that the iron sights are actually going to be in the lower 1/3 of the aiming circle. So those sights are actually a little bit higher than the sights than the standard iron sights are. And that's actually what this one looks right here. The KS-47, even though it shoots 7.62 by 39, it is an AR, and the specs that it's made to are basically AR specs in terms of height over bore and those kinds of things. And so the mount that I have on here is the 1/3 lower co-witness riser for this red dot. So if I had a traditional front sight and a traditional rear sights, it would go through the lower 1/3 of the circle. It wouldn't quite make it up to the midline. And luckily, the Holosun sights handle both of those. There's a little spacer that you have to put in it for this height, for the 1/3 lower co-witness height sights, but it comes with the spacer and it's relatively easy to take it apart and install those screws and those kinds of things. So not really a big problem there, but the problem that I wound up with though is that since it's only meant to be used on elevated red dot sights, I can't use it with any of my other red dot sights because they're all flush mounted. So that was a little bit disappointing. And I also found that to get the best use out of the magnifier, you do really have to tailor it to one red dot in particular. And that's because when you zero the red dot, of course, you're going to be changing where the red dot is in location and in orientation to the rest of the gun. That's how you make your adjustments. Well, as you're adjusting the red dot, left, right, up, and down, if you try to stick a magnifier behind it, and that magnifier is such that the center of magnification is in the center line of the sight housing of the red dot, it's not always going to line up because, like I said, to zero the gun, you're going to have to move the red dot left, right, up, down, whatever the case happens to be. And so it turns out that to get the best usage out of it, you actually have to adjust the magnifier to match your red dot. And that's why the magnifier actually has these little turrets on the top and the side. It's not so that you can change the reticle. The reticle's in the dot. Instead, it's so that you can change the center of your magnification to coincide with the dot. And of course, that's going to change from red dot to red dot because it changes from gun to gun. When you zero in a gun, they don't all zero the exact same way. And so if you want to get your best use out of it, you're basically stuck with one gun and one red dot. Now, could I throw this on another gun that had the same height above bore, or at least height above rail? Yes, I could. And even if it wasn't properly lined for it, I would still get some usage out of it. So that part is still nice, but like I said, it's not going to be optimized for anything but the one that you actually adjusted it for. So there is that to keep in mind. But for the particular gun, like I said, it works pretty well. Yesterday I was able to take it out and shoot it out to 150 yards. I was at a different range than the one that I'm normally at, so I didn't have quite as much distance as I was hoping to get. So I would have preferred to try it at 200 or 300, but just didn't have that kind of range available. So had to be satisfied with 150, and even though it was just 150, I was able to tell that it did make a very noticeable difference. The thing that I liked most about it is that it actually cleans up the red dot for me. And the reason for that is fairly simple. Whenever you have an optic that can be adjusted for the individual user's eye, a lot of times you're able to take out the problems that are caused by astigmatism. So the astigmatism will make a non-magnified red dot blurry for me. But if I pass it through the magnifier and then I use the diopter on the end to adjust it for my eye, most of that distortion can be taken out. And also, since it's magnified, I'm able to see the reticle a little bit more clearly, which means I don't actually have to have it as bright as I normally do. So I can actually turn down the brightness a little bit, and that further helps clean up the image. I don't have as much bloom if I can turn it down a little. So zeroed the red dot with the magnifier off to the side, and at fairly close ranges, say about 25 yards or something, I was getting the equivalent of a roughly 3 MOA group. Now, of course, at 25 yards, that's only like 3/4 of an inch, something like that. But and for me, that would be fairly normal. A red dot that close up, even with astigmatism, it usually doesn't cause that many problems because the target's so much bigger than the red dot is. But the real test for me to see if the magnifier actually made the difference that I wanted it to was to see if it actually still worked at distance. Was I able to hold the same size group even at distance? Now, it should be noted that the ammo that I used here wasn't the greatest. It was the Wolf Polyformance 123 grain ammo, which isn't terrible, but it's not great either, at least depending on the lot that you get and where it's made and those kinds of things. But the issue for me was can I get the same size group when I go further out? And so I took it out to 100 yards, flipped over the magnifier and shot a 5-round group, and lo and behold, it was a 3 MOA group. That's not been my normal experience with red dots. Normally with the red dots up close, I can get pretty precise groups, somewhere between 1/2 inch and an inch depending on the gun. And then when I take it out further, like to 100 yards and beyond, the groups usually kind of start to fall apart. That wasn't the case here. This case, the magnifier was such that it allowed me to maintain my group size. And I also was making hits out at 150 yards, but if you can hit 100, 150 is not that much harder. So that doesn't really prove a whole lot, but like I said, the group size wound up being consistent, and that was the main thing that I was looking for. Taking a gun that, like I said, it's not really, these older models are not really great, personal defense, bet your life on it type of gun, and so still getting use out of it by taking it and doing something that I wasn't originally planning on doing with it, but making it a more regular part of my intermediate range shooting, and turns out the magnifier did just that. Now, there are a few caveats that need to be pointed out there. In addition to having to select the riser that is appropriate for your height of red dot, and also in addition to adjusting the turrets to actually match where the red dot is, so that your center of magnification lines up with that and everything works out nice and neat. In addition to that, there's also a couple other things that need to be noted. One is the screw, the adjustment screw for the quick detach. Not all rails are going to be exactly the same size. They try to make them the same size. If it's 1913 standard, it should be 1930 standard, but they don't always wind up exactly the same, and so there is an adjustment screw there that you can use to get it to fit properly. And Holosun says that it fits properly basically when you can operate the QD mechanism with one finger. You should be able to take it off and then push it back into place just with a single finger. As long as you can do it with a single finger, then it's good. So there is that little adjustment that needs to be made. Another problem, well, I guess adjustments aren't necessarily problems, it's just what makes the system work. But something that is a problem is the fact that this is an older style of magnifier, and like a lot of older things, it tends to be a little bit heavier than the modern versions. And this one is like a 9-ounce model, something like that, a little over 9 ounces. And so with the red dot, which is about 5 ounces, you wound up with basically a full extra pound on the gun in terms of optics. And so it does make the gun quite a bit heavier. Now, as you saw, it's a quick detach, so I can take it off the gun if I don't want the extra weight, but it does add some extra weight. There are other models that are out there made by other companies, like Primary Arms, with their new Micro 3X magnifier that cuts that weight about in half. Their magnifier is only like 5 ounces, so if you really want to save weight, that's the way to go. There's other companies out there that make a lot better magnifiers in terms of the level of magnification. For example, I think Vortex has a 6x magnifier. So if you're really wanting to stretch the legs and go past that intermediate zone into basically, you know, standard combat rifle zone, standard issue combat rifles that are usually made to get somewhere in like the 400 to 500 yard mark, going with a higher level of magnification would be better for that. You're not going to take any of the intermediate cartridge guns and turn them into battle rifles that are capable of going, you know, 600, 800 yards, but, you know, higher level of magnification, if you're really wanting to focus on the other end of it, can be a very useful thing. So yeah, that is basically my appraisal of the device. It works as intended. It allows you to take a gun that would otherwise be optimized for CQB and turn it into something that can work for intermediate ranges as well, and work quite well at those. And for someone with astigmatism like myself, it really cleans up that red dot reticle. In terms of cost, I will say that it's always worthwhile to look for special sales and whatnot, but normal retail price for this setup would be about $250 for the Holosun 503G, which is a red dot sight that I would recommend just because it has that ACSS reticle with the chevron precise aiming point in it that is really helpful for someone with astigmatism like myself, and anyone in general. There's a lot of advantages to it. And then the Holosun 3X magnifier is about $200, so you're looking at about $450 before any taxes, before any shipping and handling. So consider that. And like I said, there are other models of magnifiers that are out there that might be a little bit better suited to your needs. Like I said, there are some with higher levels of magnification, and there are also some that have more or less the same magnification, but in a much smaller package. So look around, look at the different prices. It's always a good idea to look for sales. But yeah, that is my assessment of the product, and you know, I think it's good for what it is. It doesn't solve every problem, and it certainly doesn't turn your CQB gun into a sniper rifle, but it does turn a dedicated CQB gun into like an intermediate range gun. And if that's what you're looking for, this is a good way to go. If you want something that's a little bit more strictly dedicated to intermediate range shooting, then personally I would suggest something like this. This is a 3X prism scope from Primary Arms. It is a little bit of a chunky system. It's pretty close to a full pound in and of itself, so it's a little bit chunky, and it is just a prism scope. It is set at that magnification. That's all that it is, so it's not super optimal up close. There are ways to do it. You can open up the back of the reticle and turn up the illumination, and you can use it as an occluded eyesight up close. It does also have a provision at the front for a mini reflex sight if you wanted to do that for your CQB components, but it's optimized for further distances. So if you want a dedicated intermediate range gun, something like this would work. Another kind of in-between solution that is out there is basically a kind of a medium level of magnification. This is a 2X prism scope from Primary Arms. It doesn't weigh as much, it's only about 11 ounces. And again, it's fixed magnification because it's a prism scope, so it just is 2X. 2X is low enough that at close quarters you can use it reasonably easily. It's not as easy as 1X, but it's still fairly easy. And because there's some magnification at the intermediate ranges, you know, 200-300 yards, it still provides enough of an advantage to be useful. So that's another way that you can tackle that issue of having something that's close range and long range capable, or not true long range, but intermediate range capable. But it's not really going to be optimized for either one or the other. It's like I said, a little bit more magnification than you want for close range, a little less than you want for the intermediate range. Another option that people like is using something like an LPVO. That is not what this is. This is a really cheap scope that goes on this pellet gun, this air rifle. But a lot of LPVOs and HPVOs look something somewhat similar to this, and so I'm just using it kind of as a stand-in. But the idea with variable optics, with the LPVOs in particular, is that it's something that can go down to 1x, but can also go up quite a bit. On the market right now, they have low-power variable optics, LPVOs, that are, 1 to 4 is pretty easy to find. 1 to 6 you can also find pretty commonly. There's a few companies that have made 1 to 8s, and I think even one company that is making a 1 to 10 low-power variable optic. So, I mean, literally from the bottom all the way up to 10 times magnification, that gives you a lot of room to play with. As to which one's best, it's going to depend on your situation. If you want something that really works fully and completely in a CQB environment, though, having something where you can run just a dedicated red dot is, I'm going to argue, going to be the best, because red dots and holographic sights as well. Red dots and holographic sights are easily the fastest and easiest and most accurate at speed, not most accurate period, but most accurate at speed for close quarters situations. So if you want to have a gun that is truly good at the close quarters but still want to be able to get to that intermediate range, this is the kind of setup that you probably need to be thinking about. All right, I beat that horse to death. Thank you very much for listening. For those of you who are in Christ, go with God and be blessed. For those of you who are not, I pray that you come to know the true Christ of history, the only genuine Savior of mankind. Amen.